Welcome on behalf of Massachusetts Peace Action. Actually, I'm here because I serve on the board of Peace Action and also on the public transit and nuclear disarmament groups. So we're delighted to be able to host former Governor Michael Dukakis this evening. I grew up in Brooklyn in a community in which everyone depended on the subways and buses to get to and from work, to and from school, to and from hospitals. In college, I met people who lived and worked in Manhattan, and they took taxi cabs to work every day, even though there were excellent subway and buses. Those people often had a sharply limited view of the world. There's kind of their isolation from the problem lives of hundreds of thousands of working people. Well, so in 1974, when the gubernatorial race began, I learned from friends in Brooklyn. I didn't read it in the paper. I first learned it firsthand that Michael Dukakis commuted to and from work on the Green Line. And that did it. I knew no one can go to work, to and from work on the Green Line every day without being in touch with the problems of common people, right, in their daily lives. So I joined the many progressive Democrats who worked on his campaign at a low level, never moved on. I never even met him until years and years and years later. He won. But then I was doubly thrilled when he appointed my MIT colleague, Fred Salvucci, to be his Secretary of Transportation, best Secretary of Transportation Commonwealth ever had. If Fred had been in town, he would have been up here doing the introduction, but he's in Montreal. Now, the two of them represent to me a kind of a standard of belief in and commitment to public service that's often sorely lacking in current political life. You know, if Duke had won the presidential election in 1988, the nation would be in much better shape than it is today. But it runs in the family because Kitty, I was in the audience 2 years ago when she stood up in front of the Harvard Historical Commission to protect Winthrop Square, the oldest public park in the United States, where Pete's Coffee is, against some voracious developers who were trying to go in there. It was great. Now, with respect to this title, I'll just say that in the richest country on earth, a major reason we don't have high-speed rail through the Northeast Corridor is that your Congress is spending hundreds of billions of our tax dollars to build nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines. They won't get us to work, they don't feed us, they don't clothe us, they don't solve the energy problem, and they decrease our national security. We'll explore these themes this evening and later in the discussion, and really in the year to come, we expect Peace Action and our allies expect to develop very cogently these themes of, subways, not submarines, books, not bombs, housing, not missiles, healthcare, not warfare. Michael Dukakis.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you all very much. It's great to be here, and great to be here with the former First Lady, who I continue to introduce as the best-looking, with all due respect to the rest of you, the best-looking Medicare recipient in America, and she's just had her 79th birthday. So, we had two basic rules when we were married, and by that time I was actually in the legislature. One was dinner at home at 6 o'clock at night, no exceptions. And the other was no politics on Sunday, with 3 exceptions. The St. Patrick's Day Parade in South Boston, Greek Independence Day, and combined Jewish philanthropy Stupid Sunday. And on those weeks, reflecting our respective backgrounds, and on those particular weeks, I took Saturday off. But I was a fanatic about this. This 724 stuff, folks, is crazy. I don't think anybody ever accused me now. I'm not working hard, but I needed that time for me and for my family. And we've continued to do that. So, although Kitty is deserting me in May for a variety of very important things, deeply involved in this whole issue of veteran suicide, we're losing a veteran to suicide on average every day in this country. Every day. And given Kitty's own personal history and the work that she's done in advocating for electroconvulsive therapy, she's now working with the VA American Psychiatric Association, where she will be speaking this coming month on using this very effective treatment for people who are suicidal and seriously depressed. She's here today because of it. She does grand rounds all over America. She's the co-author of the best book on the subject that's been written. And I want to tell you, this wife of mine is saving lives every day. Every day. Now, I suspect, incidentally, let me say a word or two about this business of governors writing the tea. For me and for Kitty, there was nothing unusual about this. We were writing the tea when we were 5, in the old wooden streetcars. I'll bet there's nobody in this room that rode the old wooden streetcars, right? And that's what happens when you get to be 82. I was at an event 2 days ago with very knowledgeable people. And we were talking about the North-South Rail Link and how dumb it was to spend money on expanding South Station, because if you do that, folks, then you need acres and acres of land to store vehicles. And Widett Circle is one of those areas where the mayor in particular is anxious to do some serious development. Not to mention the Alston Yards next to Harvard, which have also been set aside for the storage of vehicles. Now, if you connect the two stations, you can store vehicles anywhere. And of course, you'll solve the congestion problems at North and South Station a hell of a lot more effectively than by spending, are you ready for this? $1.5 billion to add 7 tracks to South Station. I kid you not. That's even crazier than spending $3 billion on 4.5 miles of light rail, when you could do that for substantially less. But when I got elected in 1974, and I announced to the consternation of the state police and a lot of other people that A, I wasn't going to have security, and B, I was taking the Green Line to work, people went crazy. After a month or two, they kind of got used to it. And I will tell you folks, I learned more about my own administration writing the tea than I learned about in the State House. Hey, Governor, can I talk to you for a second? And then we'll be out to the races. But when I first started writing, the previous administration had ordered new streetcars, which were supposed to be delivered in June. And they were ordered from Boeing. Now, Boeing, as you know, doesn't make streetcars. And they had never made one. They made planes and they made helicopters. And so, we contracted them, for whatever reason, to build these things. And unfortunately, they gave us an airplane, not a streetcar. I mean, the doors had, I think, 283 moving parts. And these new Boeing Vertol streetcars, which finally arrived in June, used to break down every 800 miles on average. That's, Riverside to Park Street and back about 4 times. Anyway, at the time, however, the streetcars we were riding were the old so-called PCC streetcars. Anybody here that remembers those PCC streetcars? A few of us. There's one hanging around in Boylston, at the Boylston station, which I think is a repair car of some kind. So if you go through Boylston, look to your right, you'll see these old PCCs. And we hadn't overhauled them, we hadn't done a lot of stuff. And they began breaking down that first winter when I was elected and riding it. I mean, 3 days out of 5. I ride it from Longwood to Park Street. I mean, 3 days out of 5 would break down. You never knew when you were going to get to work. And at first it was very interesting. The new governor was on the streetcar and so on and so forth. That lasted for about a month. And then people started looking at me and in effect saying, what the hell are you going to do about this, Dukakis? We can't get to work. So I finally went up to the modem on this particular morning and I said, will you explain to me why we're breaking down 3 days out of 5? He said, they're not replacing the pans. I said, they're not replacing what? He said, they're not replacing the pans. I said, what's a pan? He said, it's a piece of metal underneath the works that is bolted to the car and protects the motor and the electrical system and all the rest of it from snow and ice. And I said, and they're not replacing them? He said, they're not replacing them. So what's happening? He said, the snow and ice is getting in there, screwing up the car. I got to the State House. I called Fred. I said, Fred, I have it on very good authority that they're not replacing the pans. Now, Fred knew a lot more about pans than I did. He said, that couldn't be. I said, that's all I can tell you. The guy operating my streetcar says, now, call me back in 2 hours. He said, the guy's right, they're not replacing the pans. So we replaced the pans, and the breakdown stopped. Isn't that amazing? Ask the guy that's operating the damn thing, and they'll tell you what's going on. And frankly, one of the problems we have these days is that we're not seriously bringing our working folks into the process and involve them actively in making this, once again, the best transit system in America. There's all this beating up the union and all this kind of stuff. Believe me, folks, it wasn't the union that created this mess. It was years and years of lousy management, a failure to overhaul equipment, a failure to do the kinds of things that routinely you got to do if you're going to run an excellent transit system. When I was on the Amtrak board, we had trains, and we still have them, 50 years old. They'd come out of those shops outside of Indianapolis looking and smelling like new. And they're still operating. So, if you're trying to figure out what's wrong with the team, ask the folks that work there. They'll tell you. They'll be more than happy to participate in this if somebody would ask them. Okay, I suspect that I'm preaching to the choir a little bit today, but I'm going to do that anyway. And then, you know, Kitty and I really want to sit back and listen to you guys and see if we can't learn. I don't know about you. I like Barack Obama. I think he's done a hell of a job under very difficult circumstances, particularly given what he inherited. And he's going to continue to do that. This guy's not going to be any lame duck. And there are some folks that are cooperating to make it possible for him to do this, including the guy from Kentucky, who apparently thinks that we only confirm Supreme Court justices in the off year. I don't think that's what the Constitution says, but that's what the senator from Kentucky apparently thinks. So I think the president's going to have a hell of a last year. I like what's going on in Cuba. I like a lot of things that are going on. But I am very, very concerned, folks, about our foreign/defense policy in many parts of the world. And if you haven't seen this, I strongly recommend to you that you go online and get a speech made by Charles Freeman Jr. I don't know how many of you have seen this. The title is The End of the American Empire. Now, he's not the only person that's doing this. Andy Basovich at VU has been writing about this, Perpetual War. Michael Mandelbaum apparently has a new book. He's the guy at Hopkins, essentially saying that American intervention and this policy of interventionism has failed over and over and over again. And its most spectacular failure, in my judgment, is Syria. Now, I don't know how many of you know and remember how this Syrian mess developed. Syria has a dictator, to be sure. He happens to be an ophthalmologist and the son of the former dictator. Now, whatever you think of Assad, let me tell you, he's a significant improvement over his father, who really was a butcher. But as the Arab Spring began bubbling around us, and we all got very excited about what was going to be a democratic Middle East. You know, history teaches us otherwise. Some good people in Syria began agitating for an end of the dictatorship and democracy. That's a little difficult to do in a couple of months. And the Secretary General of the United Nations, to his credit, asked Kofi Annan, the previous Secretary General, any of you remember this? To come out of retirement and to become a mediator in an effort to see if the Syrian situation could not be resolved. Kofi Annan worked his head off for 11 months and finally put together a planned international conference to be held in Istanbul with 16 countries, which included Syria, represented by Assad. with a clear understanding that the purpose of this conference was to begin a process of gradual democratization of Syria. And Assad agreed to this. One of the countries invited was Iran, without whom you cannot have a settlement in Syria. Can we agree?
Yes.
You just can't have a settlement in Syria. We found out that Iran had been invited and said, if Iran is there, we won't go. It basically blew up the conference. Anand quit and discussed 2 days later. He worked 11 months on this thing. And what we now have is one of the most tragic humanitarian catastrophes in history, with 12 million displaced people, 350,000 dead, the country virtually destroyed, and my grandparents' home island, Lesbos, the recipient of 500,000 refugees, most of whom made it, some of whom did not. A direct result, in my judgment, of our failure to use international institutions and international processes to achieve a good result, with strong international support. Now, a better example of how to do this, in my opinion, is the Iranian nuclear agreement, where presumably we didn't have any objection to talking with the Iranians. In fact, our Secretary of Energy, Ernie Munoz, a Portuguese-American kid from Fall River, who got his PhD at MIT in the late 1970s, was our expert, my former lieutenant governor, who, by the way, I think is doing a hell of a job as Secretary of State. I really do. I think John Kerry really does some very impressive work in this interesting world of ours. And his nuclear expert was his fellow cabinet secretary, Ernie Munoz. The Iranian nuclear expert had been on the MIT campus at the same time that Munoz had gotten his PhD, and had gotten his PhD right down the street at MIT. In fact, they tell me, John, I know this is true, that those negotiations were conducted entirely in English, because all of the Iranians had advanced degrees from American universities. A great asset for us if we understand this. And I think what happened, that agreement, is not only a spectacular success, it's my view of how, as a leading nation in this world, we use our leadership in the right way to achieve good results, with strong international support. And I don't think, folks, we would have had an Iranian nuclear agreement if the 5 permanent members of the Security Council had not been committed, part of the process, to making that work, including the Russians and the Chinese, both of which agreed, supported it, and enforced the sanctions to achieve that success. And then, I don't know whether you remember this, but as soon as the negotiations were settled, the 15 members of the UN Security Council unanimously endorsed the agreement and made it virtually impossible for some people who should have known better in the United States to try to torpedo the agreement. But we've got candidates for the presidency these days, one of whom is worse than Trump. I mean, worse than Trump. Who not only wants to ghettoize Muslim communities in the United States with cops. I thought that's why his father left Cuba. But who says proudly that the day he is elected President of the United States, or the day he takes office, he will rip up the Iranian nuclear agreement that was so painfully and successfully negotiated. So that what? We then get into a land war in Iran? I mean, is that what Cruz wants? Cruz is proof positive, and I hate to say this in this environment, and as a law graduate of this place, that having an Ivy League degree, in his case too, is no guarantee of anything. Can you believe this? This guy wants to rip up this extraordinary agreement, which not only avoided what could have been chaos in the Middle East, but seems to be an important step forward in seeing if we can't create a world in which nations working through the UN achieve success, resolve differences, and I'm serious about this. Bring us to a point, it may not happen in my lifetime, I think it will happen in my kid's lifetime, where war is ruled out as a means for settling disputes between and among people. And I consider myself a hard-headed realist. I'm not being romantic about this, I am serious. And this may sound strange to you, given all of the storm and fury these days. But this is the most peaceful world that Kitty and I have ever lived in. And I'm 82 and she's 79. We were born in the middle of the Great Depression. Before we were, what, 6, 7, 8, 9? World War II started. 6 million people perished in gas ovens, in case people have forgotten that. And in point of fact, to go back a little farther, we weren't alive at the time. Kitty and I are leaving on Monday for the American University in Yerevan, Armenia. Among other things, to speak at the so-called commemoration, where hundreds of prominent Armenians were slaughtered on one day, April 15th, 1915, in Istanbul, by the Young Turks. So, how do we see if we can build a political environment in this country in which we begin to understand that there is no need for the United States to consider itself the only superpower left? You know, when you start calling yourself the only existing superpower, look out. Because we're not. There is no superpower, as we're discovering. There's not one country that can do this. Never made any sense, still doesn't make any sense. The only way we're going to build the kind of world that I think not only most of us in this room, but most of our fellow citizens want, a world which resolves its differences peacefully, using existing international or perhaps new international institutions, is to do it the way we did on the Iranian agreement. And not to continue to muck around here, there, and everywhere, sticking our nose in places which we don't understand. I mean, I like the president. I really do, and I think he's done, as I said, a pretty remarkable job. When he said, Assad has got to go, I grabbed my hand. And I said, who is advising him about Syria? I mean, if you know anything about Syria, that's the last place in the world the United States ought to be intervening militarily, at least without the approval of the international community generally. And that's what Kofi Annan was trying to do when he worked those 11 months to try to get us to the point where we, all of us, the international community, would seriously be discussing a gradual path to democracy for Syria. And we absolutely blew it. And it's not stopping. I mean, Ashton Carter is a very good guy. He's a very thoughtful guy. He was at Kennedy School for many years. He's been in the Defense Department. He's now the Secretary. A month ago, he said that the greatest threat to American security was, what do you think? Russia! I mean, is he kidding? Is he serious? You know, people say to me, what do you think of Putin? With the perspective of age, I say he's a hell of a lot better than Joe Stalin. That's all I can tell you. So what does Putin want? What did Gorbachev want? When he and the guy that beat me, who I thought was a lousy domestic president, but a pretty darn good foreign policy president, ended the Cold War. The one thing he said to George H.W. Bush was, please promise me that you will not expand NATO. That you will not shove NATO up to our borders. And what did Bush say? Don't worry, we'll never do it. We understand. So what are we doing? Shoving NATO right up the Russian borders. Trying to put anti-ballistic missiles, are you ready for this? In Poland, They happen to be pointed east, allegedly to knock down Iranian nuclear missiles. Now, when Putin heard that, he said, look, if you really want to knock down the Iranian missiles, you want to be as close to Iran as possible, right? Catch them on the way out. He said, as a matter of fact, we've got some territory that we can make available to you, which is right up close to Iran, and we'll work with you on this. Nothing doing. They got to be in Poland. Why? It's sticking a thumb in the eye of the Russians. I mean, this is not, if it weren't so serious, it'd be comic opera. I mean, Gilbert and Sullivan would do something with this. It's just, why are we doing this, folks? The South China Sea. The Chinese historically, for centuries, have claimed the South China Sea. What are they doing in the South China Sea these days? Same thing we've been doing in the Caribbean for 150 years. The Filipinos came along in the 1970s and said, we want to make a claim there too. By the way, these are absolutely worthless islands. Utterly worthless. We say, well, we've got to be involved deeply and actively because we want to guarantee the freedom of navigation. Is there the slightest evidence that China is interfering in the freedom of navigation? They need international freedom of navigation more than we do because they're much more deeply involved, frankly, economically, internationally these days. They're all over the place. So we run flights every day, surveillance flights over China. We've got our ships moving around within 12 miles of China every day. For reasons I don't understand, the administration says its pivot to Asia. Folks, if 2/3 of the Chinese Navy was positioned 50 miles off the west coast of the United States, and Chinese military aircraft was running regular surveillance flights every day over the United States, do you think there might be a little bit of objection in Washington to this? Are you kidding me? This would be a cause for war. That's what we're doing right now in Asia. Why are we doing this? And trying to create military alliances, it already happened with Korea, South Korea, Japan. We're back into a military relationship now with the Philippines, having ended it several years ago, and we're now working on a military relationship with Vietnam. All of which, to repeat what Jonathan said, is costing us taxpayers' dollars that could do wonderful things for public transportation in the United States, could help us to build a modern, high-speed rail passenger system. I mean, the world is going by us, folks. The Japanese will be unveiling their latest high-speed train next year. And it will run at top speeds of, take a guess, on the ground, 315 miles an hour. What do you think of that? That's about 3/4 of an hour to New York from here. I'm serious. This is real. And of course, the rest of the world is just absolutely running rings around us when it comes to this thing. We're still putzing along at 80 miles an hour on those Amtrak trains. We've been doing that for 100 years, folks. Which really, any of you been to Japan recently? Ridden those trains? It's positively embarrassing to come back to the United States. South Korea, where I served for 16 months. I left in March of 1957 when the per capita annual income in South Korea was $50. Go to Seoul today. Now, they made the same mistake we all did, especially Los Angeles. They started by building highways, which don't work. Big jam at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But unlike Los Angeles, though Los Angeles is now investing in a comprehensive rail-based transit system. They also built in Seoul and a number of other cities a first-class public transportation system, subway, commuter rail, In fact, Munsan, where I was stationed for 16 months, which was nothing but rice paddies with the remains of an old bank building, had been a town of 40,000, up close to what is now the DMC. Munsan today, we went there. I mean, the U.S. Army was nice enough to put a team together and take us back. And they kept saying, I said, where's my old base? They didn't have records to tell them. And there was a big commuter rail station right in the middle of what was this little village with a broken down bank facade and rice paddies. Part of a comprehensive national rail system. 2 high-speed rail systems to the south. This is South Korea, folks. $50 per capita income when I left in 1957. So, this is what we're currently facing. And the thing I don't quite understand is that I am not hearing anybody in Washington these days, including Democratic members of the United States Senate, that are taking on this continuing Cold War, pick your enemy kind of process. How many, here's a quiz for you, and I've been teaching for 25 years, so here's a quiz. If you know the answer to this, you won't have to take the final. How many American bases do we have all over the world, and in how many countries?
Over 800.
800 to 1,000.
One at a time, please, folks. How many bases?
Over 800.
837 at last count. Now, I did that count about a year ago, so maybe it's changed. 837 American bases in, John, how many countries?
119.
150. Yeah. I mean, the Cold War ended 30 years ago. As all of you know, we're spending more than the top 6 military spenders in the world combined. 837, give or take, American bases in 150 countries. And we're adding to them. In case you missed it, we're now spending millions of dollars on an American military base in southern Spain. To do what? To intervene in Africa. We're going to have 3,000 Marines in southern Spain. Now, if I was a Marine, I wouldn't mind being stationed there, would you? By the way, we have 2,000 Marines in Australia. Great duty, great looking women, I mean, Australian women, and they love the Yanks. I mean, and I don't mean the New York Yankees, I mean Yanks. But why do we need 2,000 Marines in Australia? What's that all? It's all about China. I mean, this is insanity, folks. And in the meantime, we're starving the public sector, and especially our public infrastructure, which is really a disgrace, just a disgrace. And not just here, everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, California is going to have 50 million people pretty soon. Those highways can't handle what they got now. It needs a first-class, modern, high-speed rail system. It can get you from LA to San Francisco in 2 hours and 45 minutes. But we've even got members of Congress from California. The guy that represents Bakersfield, one of the most depressed cities in California, was doing everything he can to kill what he calls that crazy train. Is he serious? You put high-speed rail through Bakersfield, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and Bakersfield will be transformed. This guy's opposing. Look, we have a lot to do. And it's groups like you guys and others that have got to carry this message. But I think most Americans agree with us. They're not quite sure what's going on out there. You know, they're scared. All this ISIS stuff. Look, ISIS is going to be destroyed, trust me. It's going to be destroyed because no matter where they're coming from ideologically, established governments don't like terrorists. And it's already happening. It's sad, you know. And it's spilling out, as we know, into Europe. I don't think there would be an ISIS if we hadn't invaded Iraq, do you? Or proceeded to expand our role in Afghanistan far beyond what we went in there for in the first place, which was to destroy Al-Qaeda, which we did. And now we've got this thing, which is metastasizing and so on. But, you know, they'll be destroyed. The question is, how do we go about the business of trying to make this a world in which we can resolve our differences peacefully? And I repeat, using international machinery through the United Nations to do so. I'm a huge fan of the United Nations. But we've got to support it. We've got to strengthen it. It should be our option of first resort, not last resort, when it comes to resolving these differences. And it can be. Because we saw that in the case of the Iranian nuclear agreement. And we've seen it repeatedly. And we should be doing a lot more of this, folks, in my judgment. And turning to the UN as a leading nation. I'm no isolationist, believe me. You can't be the son of Greek immigrants to be an isolationist. I mean, I'm committed internationalist. But that's the way to a future in which to repeat war is ruled out as a means of settling disputes between and among countries. And we are closer to that point than we have ever been in world history. We really are. And I want to see my country taking a leading role in building that kind of future. So, my hat's off to all of you for what you're doing. This really is a question of trade-offs between subways and submarines. 8 new nuclear submarines, costing what? $3-4 billion a piece. $300 billion for a new stealth bomber. To do what? Against whom? I mean, I don't think IS is scared of stealth bombers. They'll go by them so fast they won't be able to see them. I mean, there's a threat out there, to be sure. That kind of stuff is utterly irrelevant to the threat we face. I mean, it's really crazy. 300 billion? 100 billion would get us a first-class high-speed national rail passenger system, folks. Not to mention the resource to repair our streets, build schools, do a lot of other stuff. $300 billion for 100 stealth bombers. Insane, isn't it? Or am I missing something? So, we've got a lot to do. Obviously, the presidential election and the congressional election be very important. And let me say a quick word about that. There's a guy that couldn't win the presidency and has a lot of respect for folks who can, including the guy in the White House. The chaos in Republican ranks, and I'm not saying this is partisan, I think I'm saying this objectively, has given my party an extraordinary opportunity. And this is a gift from God. I mean, it's incredible. But it's not going to fall into our laps automatically. We're going to have to work at it very hard. And I'm not just talking about winning the presidency. I'm talking about taking back the Congress. And how about this guy in Kentucky who has added to the pot by suggesting that there's no time for the Senate to be confirming what in this case is an extraordinary nomination. I mean, this guy's really very, very good. And was educated across the street like a lot of good folks, but not all. But if we're going to take full advantage of this in a way that gives us the kind of political leadership, both in Congress and in the White House, that shares our values and our hopes, this has got to be a 50-state, 200,000 precinct campaign. And I'm serious. Forget about red, blue, purple, and that kind of stuff. I just saw a poll the other day in which Hillary Clinton beats Trump in Utah. That means that every state is in play. And we're going to have to take it seriously, and I'll tell you this one last story before closing things down and opening things up. The Amtrak board on which I served was one of the best boards I've ever served on. There were 6 of us, all appointed by Bill Clinton, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And the 3 Republicans were Tommy Thompson of Wisconsin, who subsequently became Secretary of Health and Human Services, but refused to serve a second term in the Bush administration, for reasons that I won't get into, but said a lot about Tommy and not a lot about the administration. Couldn't stand Karl Rove, couldn't stand it. Linwood Holton, the first Republican governor of Virginia since Reconstruction, and the first civil rights governor of Virginia, and a guy who happens to be the father-in-law of Timothy Kane, who was the Democratic United States Senator and former governor of Virginia. And a very interesting guy who became a very good friend of Kitty's and mine, named John Robert Smith, a pharmacist by trade, who was the 4-term mayor of Meridian, Mississippi. And John Robert, wonderful guy, passionate about a national rail passenger system, called me in May of 2008. Hey, he said, your guy, meaning Obama, is only 5 points behind McCain in Mississippi. And John Robert didn't like John McCain because John McCain wanted to abolish Amtrak and get rid of the national passenger system. He said, Obama can win Mississippi, but we have got to see some activity around here. You know, some headquarters, signs, this, that, and the other thing. There's absolutely nothing going on for Obama. He's 5 points behind. I said, okay, let me see what I can do. Picked up the phone, can't remember who I called. Somebody fairly high level in the Obama headquarters, who thought I had lost my mind. Mississippi? You want us to spend time and effort in Mississippi? I said, this guy is for real. He's a 4-term Republican mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, and he wants Barack Obama to win. No response. None whatsoever. Obama lost Mississippi by 9 points. You know, most Americans, I carried West Virginia by 12 points. How come it's red? When did it become red? Working class, West Virginia is red. What? And I'm telling you folks, this has got to be a 50-state campaign. Howard Dean and I have already been talking about this. He was the Democratic National Chairman in 2005-2006, who said to Rahm Emanuel, mister, this is going to be a 50-state campaign. It was, and we took over the Congress. People forget this. And the two of us will do everything we can to turn this into a 50-state, 200,000 precincts. Can we recruit 200,000 precinct captains in the United States of America, in a country of 320 million people? I would hope so. I mean, between Clinton and Bernie, they must have 3 million contributors. So why should it be so difficult to recruit a precinct captain and then go out and find 6 block captains and make personal contact on an ongoing basis with every single voter in that precinct? And that's what we got, folks, 200,000 precincts. But this is going to take some work. This is not going to just kind of happen. It's not going to fall out of the sky. And it's an extraordinary opportunity, not only to win, but then to see if we can't come up with a foreign and defense policy that not only makes sense and works, but achieves the kinds of things that I think all of us in this room want to achieve. And I hope you can be part of that. Thanks.
I'm going to open it up to the floor. You might have to come up to the microphone. Good acoustics, but not great acoustics.
Who's first? Who's second?
I have a question. So, thank you very much, Governor Dukakis. You're amazing with your age, because my parents, our parents, my sister, are in the 80s and they're falling.
Well, my mother used to say, if you want to live a long life, pick your parents.
That's right. Good advice.
My mother lived to be 100, and Kitty's dad was still conducting the Boston Pops when he was 94. So we're planning to stick around for a while.
It must be a great diet too, and some other things. But anyways, I wanted to ask about how to raise the budget for the UN. U.S. does not contribute very much. It would be nice to see some international support or interventions more increase, but I think we also are not being a good player in the whole system. I guess another question would be, could we have abolish the military like Costa Rica did? I think it would be nice that we could do something like that.
The answer to the first question is the kind of political leadership which understands how important this international institution is, helps people to understand that. I mean, I didn't hear a lot coming out of the Iranian negotiations about the importance of the UN's role. I wish the president could have said more about that, so that people understood just how important that was. And the second thing you have to do is go to the UN when these disputes arise, use it effectively, and explain to people why you're doing that, because that's the most effective way to resolve these differences. And I don't think we're doing that enough. And the one thing you don't want to do is ignore the UN, as Bush too did, and just with that crew of his just kind of run around intervening here, there, and everywhere, which is interesting because if you read his dad's memoir, you know, Bush 1 was criticized by conservatives in this country for not going to Baghdad and eliminating Saddam and so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of this was coming from the Republican right. And in his memoirs, he tried to answer that. And he said, you know, our critics said that we should have, but he said, we had built this extraordinary international coalition opposing Saddam Hussein's aggression against Kuwait, including, by the way, the vast majority of Arab countries, with a clear understanding that we were doing so to repel unprovoked aggression, not to change regimes. And it was on that basis that we attracted so many of these countries in this extraordinary international coalition, UN sanction. To do otherwise would have broken that understanding. And secondly, he said, had we done what our critics urged us to do and gone to Baghdad, we ran the risk, listen to this, of becoming an occupying army in a hostile land. That's George H.W. Bush. Too bad the kid didn't read his father's memoir, right? And what are we today? There we are. There we are. So, I think that's the way we try to make the UN relevant and important, by using it in ways that have great chances of succeeding. And that's essentially, I think, what Iran teaches us. What failing to follow up on Kofi Annan's leadership in the Syrian situation has done is not only create this humanitarian disaster, but basically failing to use that institution to do what I think could have been quite successful. And if you do that, then don't be surprised if people don't take the UN seriously, especially if it's the United States that's ignoring it, or in this case, essentially blowing up some pretty serious efforts to negotiate a settlement of the Syrian situation peacefully.
I wonder if you can give us some advice. I noticed a lot of times when I brought up this issue of massive U.S. military spending and talk about local needs. What's said is that's the federal budget. We're talking about a state budget. We're talking about a city budget. And it's the perception, I believe, is that they're completely separate and priorities for the city, for the neighborhood, for the state have nothing to do with national priorities.
Well, it's an interesting thought, but it's just dead wrong. we have something called the interstate highway system. 90% paid for by the federal government, and still maintained with significant federal assistance. We now have something called the Affordable Care Act. There was no way we were going to get close to universal health care in this country if we waited for 50 states to get around it. Yeah, Massachusetts did, okay. A few other states did. But there are at least 18 states that have refused to accept the federal money which would pay for expanded Medicaid. Won't do it on ideological grounds. And by the way, folks, those uninsured people are overwhelmingly working Americans and their families. They're not sitting around, they're not on public assistance, they're not loafing. These are working Americans with no health insurance. Well, fortunately, thanks to this President of Congress of the United States, at least in his first 2 years, we now have done what every other advanced industrialized nation in the world has done, and that is assume responsibility for the health care of our people. And, you know, there must be 700 federal grant and aid programs in the states doing all kinds of stuff. So, this is a federal system. We don't have separate layers that don't talk to each other. And in point of fact, if you look at a typical state budget, a large chunk of that is federal money and federal policy. And I'm fine with that, and I think you're fine with that. On the other hand, you know, if you're spending really close to $1 trillion a year on defense and related kinds of activities, that's $1 trillion, a substantial portion of which it seems to me ought to be going to important domestic priorities without in any way jeopardizing the security of the United States. Yeah.
I'm Mike. I want to start by acknowledging Kitty for not, maybe, I don't know if people know that Kitty was born in Cambridge, but for the work that you did in helping to protect Winthrop Park not too long ago when there was a project put forward that would have put it in shadow. And actually you helped create the public-private partnership that protected it 30 years ago too, and so I appreciate, you know, that's great work that you did. I would like to ask you, Mike, who are you supporting for president and why? and I remember walking with you to the subway once in Kendall Square before Deval Patrick got elected, and you turned to me and you said, he's not talking about public transportation. How do we get this issue to have salience in state politics in Massachusetts? I mean, we all seem to care about it, but it doesn't ever seem to get traction.
Well, let me answer the second question first, and I'll get back to the question of who Katie and I are supporting. And why. Cities are coming back in a remarkable way. You know, we've been laboring for the last 40 or 50 years in a country where cities were dying. No longer. They're coming back. Why? Because the young people, particularly among us, really don't want to live in the suburbs. They really don't want to buy cars. They may ride a bike, they like to walk, maybe they run, but they want the activity and the excitement and the fun of a city. And it's extraordinary for us. I mean, believe me, we've been laboring for years. My top priority as governor was trying to bring back Boston and the other 20, 25, 30 older mill cities that were dying. And the state wasn't doing a damn thing about it. Well, they're coming back. And young people are very comfortable with public transportation. If it's any good, they want to ride it. In fact, there's a new phenomenon out there. Kitty and I get on the streetcar, and about 5 young people get up to give us their seats. And I say to them, do I look that old? I mean, it's amazing. We didn't do that, did we? I don't remember. It happens every time, and they don't know who I am. I mean, if you're under 30, you have no idea who I am. And that number goes up 1 every year. I'm serious. I mean, it's amazing. So there's a growing demand for this, and the cities are coming back. And I think, you know, it needs some work and it needs some advocacy. But I think we're on the upside now. And we've been on the downside of urban decline almost since I can remember. Now, who are we supporting for president? Katie and I are supporting Hillary. Why? Well, she has a special reason. Women never forget. Bernie Sanders endorsed Jesse Jackson over me for president of the United States. And Katie's never forgotten that. I mean, I think she may be a little too tough, but in any event, I want to win this election. I have a lot of respect for the guy from Vermont, but I'm very concerned, folks. Because I think if you got the nomination, billions of dollars right with money would absolutely kill him. I mean, they'd start bringing out those speeches about what a great guy Castro was and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, Bernie's got an interesting history here. And it isn't that I don't like where he stands for in lots of places. I'm not happy about where he's on guns, but, you know, he's from Vermont. I mean, you got to understand this. Okay. And, you know, Hillary represented New York, so you got to at least pay some attention to Wall Street, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's what happens. And we've got some great Democrats representing Connecticut, but they got to be concerned about the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, it's part of your constituency. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I think this is going to be a battle if Hillary gets the nomination. Because we know the kind of money that's pouring in, thanks to a Supreme Court, a majority of whom were appointed by conservative presidents, that has discovered some very interesting things, like that money is speech. Where does it say that in the Constitution? Somebody pointed out to me. And by the way, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I was a member of the class of 1960 at the Harvard Law School. So was Antonin Scalia. Even then, he was to the right of Marie Antoinette. I mean, but the notion that Scalia was a constitutionalist, an originalist, that his decisions were based on a little reading of the Constitution is preposterous. That guy stretched and pulled and jammed that Constitution every way he could. And I'll tell you a quick story. I don't want to go on great length, but I didn't know Scalia until my last year, because in those days, you had a class of, I think, 475, and they divided us in sections of 125, and for the first 2 years, you went with your section exclusively to prescribed courses. There were no electives in the first 2 years. And so you knew everybody in your section, but you don't know a lot of people outside the section unless you had met them some casually. My third year, I took an elective, one of the few that you could take, called the Federal Courts of the Federal System. And it was taught by a wonderful man named Henry Hart, who was kind of a national. And it had to do with federal courts, state courts, you know, conflicts, all this kind of stuff. This is right in the middle of the Civil Rights Revolution. It's 1960. And from the opening day of class, there's this guy who insists on engaging Professor Hart in these long dialogues about the delicate balance in the federal system and how important it was. Now, that was a time, folks, when federal judges were beginning to reach in to state courts, especially in the South, and take cases away from those courts, because if you were black and a criminal defendant in those days in the South, forget it. I mean, you were guilty. And maybe worse. And this went on for about 3 weeks. And I finally turned to the guy next to me and I said, who the hell is that guy? He said, he's Scalia. He's in the law review. And I remember saying, I said to him, does he know what it's like to be black in the South? In fact, I could have said black anywhere, but especially in the South. Never forgot that. Believe me, I was thinking hard about the delicate balance between the federal and state systems when he was doing his thing on Bush versus Gore. I mean, the delicate balance between the federal and state system kind of disappeared on that one, right? I mean, it was a purely political decision. So, you know, he's an interesting guy, he's a bright guy, funny guy in some respects. But give me a break here. One other thing about Kitty and the little park. She began running something called public space partnerships at the Kennedy schools. And started looking around and seeing where were there places, small, not so small, where there could be some real partnerships. And she kind of focused on the park, right? Went with the park. Went to Derek Bach, and as Bach described it, practically broke his arm to get $25,000 for the park. Once the work was completed, Bach said, "It's the best $25,000 I ever spent." But Kitty was the person that almost fractured his elbow to get that money. But look what happens when you do that, right? And that thing, let me tell you, that was a drug supermarket before Kitty and folks started going to work on it. It was awful. But it's a little gem, it's enjoyed by thousands, and it's a good reason not to build high-rises around it, right? Another great alumnus of the Dukakis administration.
And proud of it. As I look at the Obama administration, I think Barack Obama got captured by the military-industrial complex. And the best evidence is the recent proposal to spend $1 trillion over 30 years on redoing our whole nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
How do we prevent that the next time around? What went wrong? And how do we
Peter,
prevent
it's a
it?
damn good question. I mean, this is a good guy. He's made a lot of tough decisions and good decisions, still at it. This is an area where he has enormous authority as commander-in-chief, right?
Mhm.
And he's got a Republican Party that wants to spend more than he wants to spend, for reasons I don't understand. I mean, if these guys are conservatives, you can't prove it by me, at least when it comes to the military. If I had one, would it have happened to me? I hope not. But I think part of this is just being surrounded by a lot of folks who tell you that the threats are everywhere. In fact, I would not have had a daily security briefing. How about once a week? Why do you have to listen to this stuff every day? You know, I'm not being a wise guy. I mean, it's a little much, don't you think? I think he's got a strong sense of history, which is important here. But I can't explain it. Has he been captured? No. But has he been influenced by this stuff? I mean, ask Carter, you know, Rhodes Scholar. Russia is the single most important threat to American security. I mean, where's he getting that from? Is there anybody in this room that thinks Russia is the single most important threat to American security? I mean, seriously, anybody? Don't be embarrassed. Put up your hand if you think the Russians are, you know. I mean, isn't this crazy? This is a bright guy. How do we prevent it? Well, one way is to elect members of Congress who are willing to do what Ted Kennedy used to do and stand up and say, you're off base. You know, you're doing the wrong thing. This is not going to make sense. This is not the way to achieve whatever it is we're trying to achieve. And I wish I could see more of that, Peter. Where are these folks? You know, where are the Kennedys? And I don't say this as Kennedy. I mean, I say, where are the United States senators that are, you know, frankly, I don't want to be critical of them, but I don't remember Sanders standing up and saying this, making those kinds of speeches. Maybe he did, but I don't remember it. I mean, in a strong, consistent, persistent way. And we've always had senators like this, haven't we, in the past? I don't see them now. What's happened to them? I don't know. So I'm not sure he's captured, but he's certainly been strongly influenced by this. And I think he's bought into this notion that we are engaged in a perpetual war against evil someplace, and you pick the enemy of choice, right? Who's it going to be? And I think part of it is groups like this, part of it's our working with our congressional delegation to try to get them to do this. But it's disappointing, especially when have somebody like this with a lot of brains, considerable wisdom, and at least when he started out, a clear sense that these wars were a mistake and we should get out. Was there the international element to it? Not so much. Not so much. I think maybe if you combine that with much stronger support for UN peacekeeping machinery, we might be somewhat better off. Because then you would have had some positive UN victories, not just Iran, but a number of other things where we might have been able to demonstrate to people that that was a much better approach. But it's an issue, there's no question about it. I mean, you're spending $1 trillion, you got all these folks who've got a big stake in $1 trillion defense budget. Modernizing nuclear weapons. This is the guy that wants to get rid of nuclear weapons. Well, if you want to get rid of them, why would you modernize it? You know, we should be working hard to try to negotiate with the Russians and others for further reductions. That makes sense to me. Sorry, I wish I had an answer.
Thank you.
I very much like it that you gave us the figure of $100 billion for a rail system.
No, I'd say Obama, in his first year, recommended $10 billion a year over maybe a 10-year period, something like that, to give us a first-class, high-speed national rail passenger system. But you're talking $10 billion. I mean, what did the Iraq War cost? Total cost? 2 trillion? 3 trillion. Think about it. Yeah. Well, we'll have to spend it, right?
In those figures, you're talking about a national light rail?
National rail passenger, not light rail, national high-speed system, along with excellent metropolitan public transit systems like rail and subway. So,
Well, I like that figure because if we're going to challenge the military budget, and we can say that $10 billion a year versus $580 billion a year for the military budget,
yeah.
it lets us bring that reality and the discrepancy home to people. And so that's good to have those types of figures.
And to help people understand what we're spending it on. I mean, this stealth bomber thing. Is there anybody who thinks we need a stealth bomber? We don't have enough firepower right now. 100 planes, $300 billion. I mean, 100 billion would give us a first-class modern high-speed.
And that's $100 billion over 10 years.
100 billion over 10 years, yeah.
But a problem is we have working locally. Most of us are very concerned about the T.
Yeah.
And there's been meetings, and people go to the meetings, and
Right.
don't raise the fare.
Right.
But none of us are able to find any figures at all for what it would actually cost to fix the T, nor can we find out where the money comes from. We spend a lot of time doing research, contacting the T caucus at the State House and talking to Capuano. No one knows where the money, there's like 16 different sources for the money, a little piece here, a little piece there. We can't come up with any type of figure for what it would actually cost to fix the T or what the real problems are. As a result, it puts us in a difficult situation to say, move the money from this to this, because we just don't have the foggiest idea of where the money comes from and how much is needed.
Well, we've got a problem, folks. I don't want to say that, when I was governor, we had the greatest transit system in the world, but we had a damn good public transportation system. So what happened to it? Well, under administrations of both parties, quite frankly, we get lousy management. We had, I like Duval, I thought he did a pretty good job as governor, but he went through, 4 or 5 transportation secretaries in 8 years. I had 1 for 12. Now, we happen to be the best state secretary of transportation in the country. But Fred Salvucci was there for every minute that I was there, 12 years. So you not only have a terrific, the most selfless public servant I've ever known. and a guy who knew his stuff, and had great political skills as well. Very important. But there was consistency there. And if you wanted information, you could get it. And you'd get plenty of it. So what do we got now? Got a new administration. Bill Weld and I are working very closely with the new administration, trying to get them to get serious about this no-South Railing thing. But there's no MBTA CEO. And the new administration has been in office for 15 months. There is no director of planning and construction. So how come when I was governor did we do $3 billion worth of deconstruction on time, on budget, without a whiff of scandal? Because Salvucci knew that a guy named Frank Kevel, Irish kid from Dorchester, Northeastern Co-op Civil Engineering, career engineer at the T. He knew how good Frank Kevel was and created something called the Planning and Construction, Peter Ware, Planning and Construction Director under Kevel. And Frank Kevel was responsible for $3 billion worth of construction, including, by the way, the extension of the red line from Harvard Square to Airway at a depth of 140 feet. On time, on budget, longer by at least a half a mile than North-South Railing. And, you know, I got to know Kevel. I loved working with him. And he loved working with us. But, you know, it's those kinds of folks that, it's all about people, you know. It really is all about people. No CEO, no director of planning and construction. Frankly, I don't believe a single number that comes out of the TV these days. Whether it's $3 billion for 4.5 miles of light rail, or $2.5 billion for South Coast Rail, New Bedford and Fall River. That's a $600 million job. Why are you being told it's cost $2.5 billion? Well, I could go on at great length. I don't want to bore you with this. But if you don't have a management team, the first thing, look, when I got elected in '74, if you think the T is rough today, the T in '74 was an absolute basket case. First thing I did was go down to City Hall and say to my friend Kevin White, I'm not going to do this often, but I've got to have a first-rate CEO of the T, and I want you to let Bob Kennedy come over and run the T. Now, Kennedy was the first guy to tell you he didn't know anything about transit, but he was a hell of a manager. And he surrounded himself with a first-class team who went to work and turned that place around. And, you know, I think we had great success at the T. So, I hope Charlie Baker is going to get himself a management team soon and not wait any longer. I have no problem with oversight committees. In point of fact, I have problems with oversight committees. You know, if Joe Aiello was running the T instead of chairing the oversight committee, trust me, we'd know all about what was going on there. And we'd have estimates that were credible and all the rest of it. But it makes it very difficult for citizens to figure out what's going on when the system itself doesn't know what's going on. And consultants are piling in there by the dozens, and they're just kind of, second-guessing the last guy. It's really crazy, you know? All this clutter, all these people running around. Give me a CEO, give me a top-notch management team, including an excellent planning and construction person. Let's go to work. I mean, I don't understand this. So, I can understand your confusion.
Great, thanks.
All right. I think we're going to close the formal part, but our guest is not leaving. He'll hang around a little more for a little intimate discussion. Those of you who have pressing questions. I do want to say in response to the question, how do we get people to see those connections? I mean, we have developed a campaign here around the people's budget, and this little group of people here, you all, right? We're, calling on you to fundraise. It's not just for local, because the Mass Peace Action is probably among the most robust peace and justice organizations still existing in the United States. We're playing a national role. Cole leads the national coalition. Cole and Paul Shannon together lead the national coalition around focusing on the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Right? They're regularly talking to people around the country and organizations that represent tens of thousands of people, HUD tenants, College of Basic Human Needs. And we're bringing forward ways to talk about these things, to make clear it's your tax dollars, right? There's a good reason you don't have subways. We get submarines, and we're going to try to bring it home to people that what they're struggling for, if they allow people to tell them that the invading Afghanistan has nothing to do with, ransom your community, it's not true. Those things are connected. And so every dollar you give when we call upon you will be amplified nationally. So let's thank our guests.